Our final question here this week, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Southpaws Radio. Shortly after Mr. Wrestling 2 turned on Magnum TA, did he drop the 2 and become Mr. Wrestling? I know Hercules Hernandez became the new protege and took the Wrestling 2 name. What did Johnny Walker think about that angle?
I don't think he particularly cared. I mean, he did it the best he could, but he was pretty well about ready to quit the business and retire. He had been wrestling for 25 or 30 years at that point. And yes, he did drop the Mr. Wrestling 2 because when he turned heel on Magnum, he walked out on Magnum. And this is one thing. Dundee and Watts both crafted a great story for this, because even before Dundee got there and became the booker, they had toyed with the idea, should we turn Magnum TA heel? And then Jim Ross tells the story that as we got there, I think it had been brought up again to Dundee, and Dundee's, amenable to seeing about it or whatever. But then JR said, wait a minute. Out of the two of them, Magnum and 2, Magnum is over and he's going to get better. He's already a top guy. 2 is old and cranky. He doesn't like to deal with fans anymore. He rides in his own car by himself. He's about ready to retire. He'd be more believable as the cranky old bastard. And plus, it's a way to get one more little run out of him on top before he leaves the territory. So they went with that. They had Magnum, the babyface, in a situation where Wrestling 2 against the evil Midnight Express got so displeased with his protege that he just walked out and left him in trouble and left him to get beat and take the fucking lashes that the stipulation called for. Whipped in the middle of the ring like a dog. He left Magnum TA to suffer that. And that's when Wrestling 2 came out and said, I'm Mr. Wrestling. I'm the man, right? And that instead of having a run with Magnum, they transitioned him straight into the deal with Dog, where it was meant to be that Wrestling 2 would defeat the Dog in New Orleans with a loaded knee lift and really turn heel and win the North American title, and then goddamn have one last run as a fucking heel, and then boom, and off he'd go. And, he may have been going to work a little while longer, but he'd been out of Mid-South. But then, of course, it was, March? It was that early in the year. The fucking thing with Dog, 2 put the gimmick on his knee pad, but it wasn't really in the right place. And he hits a knee lift on JYD that JYD didn't sell it. Don't know whether he saw it coming. Don't know what the fuck, but he just kind of stiffened up and then just dropped over and it looked phony, but he still laid down for the 3. So the people said JYD just laid down for a phony knee lift. Fuck JYD and fuck this whole thing. It was a bad fucking reaction to a goddamn match. So Wrestling 2 didn't really get off as a hot heel very good, and it really hurt and maybe JYD was just under a substance or whatever the fuck, but it had damaged JYD badly in New Orleans already before he even left later on in the year. Because remember, he didn't leave to go to the WWF until the summer.
August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was already kind of dead in New Orleans just off that finish, because it looked plainly like that JYD got hit with something that wasn't real and went down and let somebody pin him. And that was, you could tell in the building the reaction. Rumble, rumble, rumble. What the fuck? That was the worst thing that could have happened to any wrestler, probably, except if Lawler had sold an invisible hand grenade in the Memphis Mid-South Coliseum. Nothing worse could have happened to any wrestler in any market than JYD looking phony in New Orleans. So that had taken the bloom off at Rose early that year. New Orleans was not even top 5 in terms of, except for the Dome shows in 1984, was not a top 5 city in that territory anymore in terms of attendance and gates.
In watching Mid-South Wrestling from 82 every week with Mike Mills on the Mid-South Wrestling Television Review podcast, the Dog's in amazing shape. He's cut. He looks just in great shape. And it's less than a year and a half later that everything is different. When you first get there, or this early period that you're there, is there any grumbling at all from The Office or Bill Watts that you ever hear? Anything you hear about the Dog, or people being upset with the Dog and either his weight gain or his lack of reliability or whatever it is?
I was not in a position to be around Bill Watts when Bill Watts was grumbling about his top star at that point. However, I was in a position to often be sitting around talking to Bill Dundee or even in the car with him, and he was the booker. And I mean, he could speak to me and Bobby and Dennis because we all knew each other. Fuck, Bobby was his, I'm starting to get Dundee's accent again. Bobby was his fucking son-in-law. And it was like, yeah, Dog's fucking, you know, because he was doing the shit at that time period heavily. And, you know, it didn't go without notice that no, not only is he gaining this weight, but fuck, he's getting lazier and it's, you know, he was still over on Aura. And the promos were tremendous, but, you know, it was harder to, well, during the last Stampede, especially after Watts tore his hamstring, kicking Dennis Condrey in the head, you know, with that one spot they do where Dennis would get juice, sometimes even on purpose. Watts was almost immobile, and Dog was just... Like the cold tag he gave Watts in the Superdome, my God, my butthole quivers still to this day. Say it was the coldest tag I've ever seen anybody give in a main event match, and it was in a Superdome. Or when Dog was, and I love JYD, and I'm not trying to knock him, but he was just not in a good place at this point. He was going to slingshot me in after one of the matches where I was supposed to be dressed in my mother's dress or put in the diaper or whatever. But I'd be on the apron, afraid to come in the ring and screaming at the referee, and Dog was supposed to come over and slingshot me in, right? Where I'm holding on to the top rope, and he grabs it and bows it out and brings me in over, right? Which is a bump I was pretty good at back before my ass got real big. But you have to grab the top rope beside where the guy is standing to get any motion on it and get the idea across, right? I'm standing there in the middle of the apron holding on the top rope. He just stood in the turnbuckle and grabbed the top rope with two hands and went kind of, and I'm going to fucking bring myself in over the top of him. What the fuck was that? But at that time, they weren't really seeing it because it was still the Dog, but it got visible a couple times. It was bad.